Greetings! Welcome in for a One Piece theory video, and here I'm going to try out a new format where we go through some of the events in the last chapter and dive more into what they might lead to next or even later in the story. Now, if there's anything here that you would like a full video on, do make that known in the comments. With that, let's jump right into it. At the end of this chapter, we are either in for a small moment of respite before the true final fight, or we are in for one of the most anticlimactic, abrupt arc conclusions in the entire series. Now, right now, I'm leaning towards the arc just not being over yet, and that for the first time in who knows how long, Imu is leaving that throne room and coming out here to us directly. In the meantime, we can see a few things play out. The rest of the Straw Hats can meet Loki in full. Maybe some conversations happen there. Or we get a little bit of a reconciliation between Loki and the rest of the giants in Elbaf. Maybe bring Jarl in, Hyrule, really flesh that out. We could even get more backstory for Loki himself. Maybe with Lola, there's a decent chance that when Nami meets Loki, she's going to bring up Lola in some way. And that might lead into that portion of his backstory. We might even get more details on the part of his backstory when he was at sea, which Imu kind of sprinkled in a little bit of during the chapter. And we may also find out how it is that Loki got his special bounty. This will also give the group and everyone an opportunity to rest. Luffy is a prune, so he's going to need some food. And in general, we can kind of recoup a little bit and be ready to go into the final fight for Elbaf. In short, this could be viewed as the calm before the storm. Some questions in my mind are, will we get to see Imu's true form here, provided the black tentacle worm is not their actual true form? Will they bring any additional God's Knights with them, or any extra forces to kind of spread out the fighting, and maybe prevent the need for us to see Domi Reversi or the Nightmare Monsters again? Or will Imu's presence on Elbaf allow them to buff the God's Knights we do have, maybe make Sommers and Killingham a little more formidable, and possibly even bring in some cool 1v1 fights there? And another thing I think could really be cool is if we get a new world Straw Hat tag team, like what we saw on Thriller Bark, even if it does not include the whole crew. Frankie kind of hinted towards this possibility when he offered Luffy assistance. So here's an example, kind of going along with earlier. Let's say Sommers and Killingham regroup in some way. This would involve Killingham getting free, but there are ways to write that. And those two do receive some kind of buff from Imu that makes them stronger, and so they could serve as potential 1v1 fights for, say, Zoro or Sanji. Now, if Imu really is as strong as we assume them to be, they have been the ruler of the world for at least 900 years, it really might take more than Luffy and Loki to push them back. Now, Imu mentioned that they would only be leaving for a short while. This is either insane aura farming, or it points to the chance that Imu may only be able to leave the Holy Land for short periods of time. This could bring us the classic Oda arc countdown, similar to, say, the Birdcage in Dressrosa, or Vegapunk's message in Egghead. And so basically, we get Luffy and Loki, plus the remaining Straw Hats or Giants of Elbaf, holding off Imu for said time, rather than Imu just losing here outright, while we are in the final arc of the story, I think it is just too soon for Imu to totally go down and lose here. Or if for some reason that does happen, it would need to, in some fashion, lead towards the setup for maybe Blackbeard simply being the final villain of the story. Back in chapter 1135, we were introduced to Biblo at the Owl Library. Now here, Saul tells us that aside him being the master of the library for seemingly hundreds of years, the only other known thing about him is that every book that enters his domain is gigantified. Lilith hypothesizes that he must have consumed the grow fruit, which allows him to grow or nurture things. She is also quite surprised that it works on inorganic objects like the books. Keep in mind, though, that this is only a guess. It hasn't actually been confirmed. Now, Biblo is a huge owl, but he is not so big that he would be capable of moving all the books from the library at full size in such a short amount of time. Of course, we can simply chalk this up to him being an ancient magic owl, but come on, where is the fun in that? We see in chapter 1177 that the only items he has moved are the books themselves. This means the building and anything else that was with the building remains behind. The most likely outcome in my mind for this is that Biblo is capable of not only enlarging objects, but shrinking them as well. This could be a facet of the devil fruit that the giants and Lilith just could not see when making that hypothesis, or it could even be due to his devil fruit being awakened. We don't know how old Biblo really is, so for all we know, he could have been an ally of Joy Boy during the Void Century, which would also mean that he has definitive knowledge on how important the books remaining intact really is. I think the more intriguing question is, where did Biblo go? My first thought on this is that Biblo took them to the Heaven Realm. We don't have any idea what's up there, and it really has not been mentioned much at all outside the first time we heard about it. But if we take a quick look at Norse mythology surrounding Nidhogg, Ratatoskr, and the World Tree Yggdrasil, all elements we now have in one piece, Loki, Ragnir, and the Atom Tree. The only thing missing from that mythology is the eagle that's at the top of the tree, which is what Ratatoskr brings Nidhogg's messages to, and then he also brings the eagle's messages down to Nidhogg. Well, if Biblo happens to be One Piece's version of the eagle, it would make sense why he might go up to the Heaven Realm, especially if he knows that for some reason it is safer than the rest of Elbaf. Maybe it's harder to get to, maybe certain conditions must be met to get that high. It could be a number of things, but if anybody's going to know about it, it's definitely Biblo. This would also give us an impetus for visiting there before leaving Elbaf, if for no other reason than to confirm for Robin and Saul that the books are safe, but also possibly to give us a bit more lore on Biblo himself, or just to show us what the Heaven Realm is all about. While I do think Robin would really want to stop for a while and read all the books, I think if a critical situation came up, or if Luffy for one reason or another asked her to wait, she would respect that request. Another option is that he took the books off Elbaf entirely, but in that case, I'm really not sure where he would have went, but perhaps it would be to an island that we have not visited yet, but will reach later on in the story. In the TCB translation, Loki said I was way too big for way too long. And in the review, I stated that almost makes it seem like Loki can affect the size of his transformation at will. But the official clears this one up. Here, the line reads, I was just too big before. This wording lines up more with how Jarl told us the devil fruit works, and that it scales up in size in relation to the user who consumes it, but not anything about said size being changeable, in any way. Which means that there really didn't end up being much ground for this one, but I brought it up mostly because I want to highlight the importance of reading different translations when putting a theory together. A mini side rant is that Oda sure is keeping Loki's hybrid form a secret from us, but I'm hoping that we get to see it by the end of the arc. Maybe in the upcoming fight with Emu. Another thing I noticed from this section is that I think it is the first time that Loki called Luffy by his name. I did not fully notice this one in my review, but there is something bizarre going on with Sommers and his regeneration. To start off with, his heart almost looks like it could be metallic or mechanical in some way, though it appears to be beating like a normal heart, but the way it's drawn and shaded is just more unique. And we have references for this from one Mr. Trafalgar D. Waterlaw. In chapter 662, we see him remove Smoker's heart, and while the sound effects are similar, Smoker's heart looks more organic. Another bizarre thing about this scene with Sommers is that visually it appears his heart is being encapsulated in his head as he begins to regenerate. In some way, I am thinking that this might be giving us hints to an additional weakness of the Gauze Knights, or maybe even the primary weakness of the Gauze Knights, and perhaps hinting to a more permanent way of defeating them. Oftentimes in story, especially when it comes to beings that can regenerate, there is something within them that acts as a core. Another common mechanic with this is that the core often has the ability to move around as much as possible to avoid being destroyed. We saw in chapter 1175 that when Sommers tried to run the Fade against Luffy and Loki, he gets decisively obliterated, with giant Gear 5th Luffy's booming Dawn Thor rifle splitting his head into pieces, and then Loki just coming in with a nasty stomp, just crushing him into the ground like a gnat. From what we can see, both attacks are just laden with Conqueror's Haki. And we already know that this likely greatly delayed his regeneration, but with the reveal of that heart during this chapter, I somewhat expect that if it had been destroyed in the attack, Sommers would not be coming back. Killingham's treatment of being split apart, so dirty, may also lend itself to this as well. It presents an opportunity for that group of Straw Hats to discover this weakness through Killingham. And that, like, if this is true, if an individual was just that strong, like if somebody didn't have Conqueror's Haki, but they were still just that guy, and they knew of this weakness, this secret, it would give them a route to being effective in killing the even seemingly immortal God's Knights. I'm thinking this one might tie into a theory of mine behind how, Emu's abilities work, and could create a shot at not only killing the God's Knights, but potentially liberating them as well, if, say, we wanted to try saving Gunko. And that's the video. If you would like to add to any of these ideas or expand in some way, please leave that in the comments. I'd love to discuss more down there. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe. I'd greatly appreciate it. Who knows, if you hated the video, let me know too. Any feedback is great. But with that, I would like each and every one of you to have an excellent rest of your day.